The truck's engine struggled against the heat as Hamad checked the temperature gauge for the fifth time that hour. 120 degrees outside. The needle hovered dangerously close to the red zone. Beside him, his cousin Yasser slept with his mouth open, snoring softly despite the rattling of loose parts in the dashboard. They had been driving for 14 hours straight through the Rub al Khali, the empty quarter. 300 miles of nothing but sand dunes and heat shimmer. The road was barely a road anymore, just tire tracks that previous trucks had carved into the desert floor. Every few miles, stone cairns marked the path, ancient markers that Bedouins had placed centuries ago. The sun was setting now, painting the dunes orange and red. Soon it would be dark, and the temperature would drop 40 degrees in minutes. That was when they would make camp. Not here, though. Hamad knew better than to stop near the cairns. His grandfather had taught him that, "Never sleep where the old stones watch," the old man had said. "They mark more than just the path." Yasser woke with a grunt as the truck hit a particularly deep rut. He rubbed his eyes and looked out at the endless sand. How much farther to the fuel station? "Another 60 miles, Hamad said. "We'll camp soon. There's a flat area about 10 miles ahead where truckers usually stop." "Good. My back is killing me." Yasser stretched and cracked his neck. "Remind me why we didn't just fly to Riyadh?" "Because your father wanted his truck delivered personally, and he's paying us each 5,000 rials for 3 days of driving." "Right?" Yasser opened a bottle of warm water and took a small sip. They had learned to ration everything out here. "Still think we should have taken the coast road. Adds 2 days. This way is faster. And more dangerous." Hamad shrugged. He had driven this route 6 times before. The desert was only dangerous if you were careless. Run out of fuel, water, or break down without a radio, and yes, you would die. But if you were prepared and respectful of the desert's rules, it would let you pass. The sun dropped below the horizon as they reached the camping spot. It was nothing special, just a flat area of packed sand about 50 meters from the road. Other travelers had left fire pits made from circles of stones. Empty water bottles and food wrappers had been collected in a pile, waiting for someone heading back to civilization to take them. They set up the small tent quickly, working in the last minutes of twilight. The temperature was already dropping. Hamad started a fire using dried brush and a small amount of diesel fuel while Yasser prepared their dinner of dates, flatbread, and canned meat. The stars came out all at once, as they always did in the desert. Without any light pollution for hundreds of miles, the Milky Way stretched across the sky like spilled salt. The fire crackled and popped, sending sparks up into the darkness. That was when they heard it. At first, Hamad thought it was the wind. The desert wind could sound like almost anything when it moved through the dunes. Voices, music, engines. Your mind played tricks on you out here. But this was different. This was clearly, unmistakably, a child crying. Yasser heard it too. He stopped chewing and turned his head toward the sound. "Is that a child?" Hamad finished. The crying was coming from the west, maybe 200 meters away. It rose and fell in the way that children's cries did when they were exhausted but couldn't stop. "Could be from another camp," Yasser said, but his voice was uncertain. They had not seen another vehicle for 6 hours. The crying continued. It was a desperate sound, full of fear and loneliness. Hamad stood and walked to the edge of the firelight, peering into the darkness. The moon was new tonight, offering no light. Beyond their small circle of fire, the desert was completely black. "We should check," Yasser said. "Someone might have had an accident." Hamad wanted to disagree. Every instinct told him to stay by the fire, to ignore the sound. But what if it really was a child? What if a family's vehicle had broken down and they needed help? He could not live with himself if he ignored a child in danger. "Get the flashlights," he said. They took 2 flashlights and a bottle of water. Hamad also grabbed the tire iron from the truck, though he was not sure why. The weight of it in his hand was reassuring. The crying led them over a small dune and down into a depression between 2 larger ones. Their flashlight beams cut through the darkness, illuminating nothing but sand and a few dried bushes. The crying was louder now, more urgent. "There," Yasser said. pointing his light at a thorn bush near the base of the dune. Something white was beside it. As they got closer, they saw it was cloth, a child's blanket or shawl, and wrapped inside it was a baby. The child could not have been more than 2 years old. Dark hair, brown skin, wearing a simple white garment. It was lying on its side, crying with its eyes squeezed shut. There was no one else around. No footprints in the sand except their own. No vehicle tracks. Nothing. How did it get here? Yasser whispered. Hamad did not answer. He was remembering something his grandfather had told him years ago, an old Bedouin warning about children found in the desert. But the exact words escaped him. Something about the wind answering, or not answering. The baby's crying was softer now, almost exhausted. Yasser knelt beside it and gently touched its forehead. It's warm, alive. We can't leave it here. Wait, Hamad said. But Yasser had already picked up the child, cradling it against his chest. The crying stopped immediately. The baby's eyes opened, dark and wide, staring up at Yasser with an intensity that seemed wrong for an infant. We need to get it back to the fire, Yasser said. It needs water and food. Hamad wanted to protest, but what could he say? That he had a bad feeling? That his grandfather had told him stories? They could not leave a baby in the desert. That was murder. They walked back to the camp in silence. The baby did not make a sound. It just stared, its eyes moving from Yasser to Hamad and back again. When they reached the tent, Yasser laid the child on a blanket near the fire and offered it water from a cup. The baby drank eagerly, its small hands gripping the cup with surprising strength. When it finished, it lay back and closed its eyes. Within minutes, it seemed to be asleep. We'll take it to the fuel station tomorrow, Yasser said. They'll know what to do. Maybe someone reported a missing child. Hamad nodded, but he kept watching the baby. Something was wrong with how still it was. Children that young usually moved in their sleep, twitched, made small sounds. This one lay perfectly motionless, like a doll. They took turns keeping watch, though neither said why. The desert was full of jackals and hyenas that might be attracted to the camp. That was the excuse they gave each other. But really, they were watching the child. During Hamad's watch, around 2 in the morning, he noticed something strange. The baby's chest was not moving. He leaned closer, holding his hand near its mouth. No breath. Panicking, he reached out to shake it awake. The moment his hand touched the child's shoulder, its eyes snapped open. It stared at him with those dark eyes and smiled. Not a baby's smile. Something else. Then it closed its eyes again, and this time Hamad could see its chest rising and falling normally. He did not sleep for the rest of the night. At dawn, they packed quickly. The baby woke as they were loading the truck, and Yasser carried it to the vehicle. They placed it in the back seat, wrapped in Yasser's jacket. It watched them with those unblinking eyes but made no sound. The truck started on the third try. The engine sounded rough, worse than yesterday. Hamad hoped it would last until the fuel station. He pulled onto the road and accelerated slowly, not wanting to stress the engine. For the first hour, everything seemed normal. The baby slept, or appeared to sleep. The desert rolled by, endless and monotonous. The temperature began climbing as the sun rose higher. Then Hamad glanced in the rearview mirror. The baby was sitting up, though they had laid it down. It was staring directly at him through the mirror, its mouth slightly open. When he turned around to look directly, it was lying down again, eyes closed. "Did you see that?" he asked Yasser. "See what?" "The baby." It was sitting up. Yasser turned to look. "It's sleeping." Hamad checked the mirror again. The baby was lying down. He shook his head and focused on driving. The heat was playing tricks on him. That was all. 20 minutes later, he heard something. A sound like sand being poured. He checked the mirrors. Nothing. The sound continued, getting louder. It was coming from the back seat. "Do you hear that?" he asked. Yasser turned around. His face went pale. "Stop the truck." "What? Why?" "Stop the truck now." Hamad hit the brakes. The truck skidded on the sandy road before coming to a stop. They both turned to look at the back seat. The baby was standing. Its legs, which should have been too weak to support it, were straight and steady. Its arms hung at its sides, too long for its body. And its face was wrong. The features were stretching, melting, reforming. "Get out," Hamad said. "Get out now." They threw open the doors and stumbled out into the heat. Behind them, something moved in the truck. Not the movement of a child. Something else. Something that scraped and clicked against the windows. The back door opened slowly. What emerged was not a baby anymore. It was taller, maybe 4 feet, but its proportions were all wrong. Arms too long, legs bent at strange angles. The skin looked like dried mud, cracking and flaking. And its mouth was open far too wide, showing rows of small, sharp teeth. It spoke, and its voice was like wind through a narrow canyon. "You heard me crying. You showed mercy. Now I am yours." Hamad grabbed Yasser's arm and pulled him backward. They ran, stumbling through the sand. Behind them came a sound like laughter, but hollow and echoing. When Hamad looked back, the thing was following them, not running but gliding over the sand, leaving no footprints. They ran toward a ridge of rocks about 300 meters from the road. Hamad remembered something else his grandfather had said. Evil spirits could not cross running water or blessed ground. There was no water here, but sometimes the old shrines built into rock formations were considered blessed. The rocks were closer now. Hamad could see cloth tied to poles, the remnants of prayer flags left by travelers. A small shrine, just a pile of stones with offerings of coins and beads. They dove behind it, gasping for breath. The thing stopped about 10 meters away, tilted its head, studying them. Its form kept shifting, sometimes looking like a child, sometimes like something much older and worse. "The water," Yasser gasped. "In your pack." Hamad had forgotten he was wearing his small backpack. Inside was a bottle of water. Not blessed or special, just water. But water was life in the desert. It had power here. He pulled out the bottle and opened it. The thing took a step backward. "Stay back," Hamad said, holding the bottle like a weapon. The thing laughed again. "Water cannot stop me. I am older than your prayers, older than your stones. I was here when this desert was a sea." But it did not come closer. Hamad remembered the words now. The full warning his grandfather had given him. If you find a child in the desert, ask who left it there. If the wind answers, leave it be. If silence answers, run. But if the child itself answers, it is already too late. The thing smiled, its mouth stretching impossibly wide. "You never asked. You just took me. Now I am bound to you until the desert claims its price." "What price?" Yasser asked. "One of you stays. One of you goes. The desert is hungry, and you have fed it with your kindness." Hamad stepped forward, water bottle raised. "We reject your claim. We acted with mercy, not greed. The laws of hospitality protect us." The thing hissed. "Hospitality? You took me from my place. You carried me in your vehicle. You gave me water. The compact is made." "Then we break it," Hamad said. He started reciting a prayer his grandfather had taught him, one used for protection against Jinn and evil spirits. The words were Old Arabic, formal and powerful. The thing screamed. The sound was like metal tearing. It backed away, its form becoming less solid, more like smoke and shadow. Yasser joined in the prayer, his voice shaking but growing stronger. They held the water between them like a shield. The thing writhed and twisted, fighting against the words. But slowly it began to dissolve. First its edges, then its center breaking apart like sand in strong wind. Its voice grew fainter, more distant. "This is not over," it whispered. "The desert remembers. The desert always collects." Then it was gone. Only a small pile of sand remained where it had stood. They stayed behind the shrine for another hour, afraid to move. Finally, when the sun was directly overhead and the rocks provided no shade, they made their way back to the truck. The back seat was full of sand. Fine white sand that had no business being there. The jacket Yasser had wrapped around the baby was neatly folded on the seat, untouched. They brushed out as much sand as they could and continued driving. The fuel station appeared after 2 more hours. It was just a single pump and a small building with a corrugated metal roof. An old man sat in a plastic chair under an umbrella, dozing. When they told him what had happened, his eyes opened wide. He spoke rapidly in dialect, making signs against evil. Then he told them they were lucky to be alive. The Silat, he said, shapeshifters. They take the form of children or women to lure travelers. You fed it, gave it water, carried it in your vehicle. You made it stronger. But we stopped it, Yasser said. The old man shook his head. You delayed it. The Silat do not forget. It will follow you now, in dreams if not in form. You must never travel this road alone again. He refused to sell them fuel until they had washed the truck with water mixed with salt. He made them recite protective prayers and hang blue beads from the mirrors. Even then, he looked worried. Go, he said. Drive straight through to Riyadh. Do not stop. Do not look back. And never speak of this to anyone who travels alone. They drove for 18 hours straight, taking turns at the wheel. Neither spoke about what had happened. When they finally reached Riyadh, they delivered the truck and took the first flight back to their homes. Hamad never drove through the empty quarter again. He took longer routes, flew when possible, made excuses to avoid that stretch of desert. But sometimes, late at night, he would hear crying outside his window. When he looked, there would be small footprints in the dust on his windowsill. Yasser was less fortunate. 3 years later, he took a job that required him to drive through the desert regularly. He always traveled with others, never alone. But one night, his convoy was delayed, and he had to drive the last 100 miles by himself. They found his truck the next morning, perfectly intact on the side of the road. The engine was still running. His coffee was still warm in the cup holder. But the driver's seat was full of that same fine white sand. The searching parties found footprints leading away from the truck. Adult footprints at first, then smaller ones, then tiny baby footprints that disappeared into the dunes. They never found Yasser. The truckers who work that route now have a new rule. If you hear crying in the desert, you keep driving. You don't slow down, you don't look back, you don't even acknowledge that you heard it. Because the desert is patient, and it remembers every debt. They say that on certain nights, when the wind is still and the stars are bright, you can hear two voices crying in the empty quarter. One sounds like a child. The other sounds like a man calling for help. No one stops for either of them. The old Bedouins know why. They've always known. The desert gives nothing freely. Every act of kindness has a price. And sometimes that price is collected years later, when you've forgotten the debt you owe. The shrine where Hamad and Yasser took shelter still stands. Travelers leave offerings there.